Hey friends, it's Jeannie and I'm back today to share 3 different cards I created using some Ink on 3 products. The main stamp set that I am using is the Raccoon Hugs, and I've had this in my collection for a while and never actually used it, but I really love that raccoon who has his back facing us holding a heart balloon. I'm actually going to use that image for all 3 backgrounds that I create today. For my 3 backgrounds, I'm using the Ink on 3 Atelier inks, which are one of my favorites because they are super creamy, vibrant, and easy to blend. They don't have too many colors in the collection, but enough colors where I'm able to create rainbow cards. Today's background involve no special stencils at all and just some masking tape. For my very first card that I'm creating right now, it is going to be filled up with some rainbow rays. So what I do is I picked a corner and I masked it off, added ink, and then I moved on to the next color. I would just mask off the previous area that I inked up and add another ray. I am using this Simon Says paper pad that has the inch markings off just so I keep everything even. I masked it off about an inch for each ray and it worked well, but you really don't have to. The next 2 backgrounds that I create don't have any rhyme or reason. I kind of just use those masking tape pieces to mask off random areas and then I will just ink them up. So you do notice that I use different pieces of masking paper for each of the colors, and that's just so I don't cross-contaminate. For some of the colors, I end up doing that anyway, and that's okay because the color doesn't really rub off onto the next color. So I'm not super duper concerned about it. And I thought that this would be a really fun way to create some quick backgrounds without using many different products. So if you don't have these inks, you can pick out any inks that you have in your collection and use them alongside this masking tape. This masking tape, if you didn't know, is actually redaction tape. I work as a paralegal, and back in the day, which isn't that many years ago, it was before technology and before Adobe Pro came out, where you can do redactions electronically. Paralegals, like myself, would take the redaction tape and actually cover up the areas of legal documents where you needed to remove before you shared it with the other side. And so the redaction tape is all too familiar to me. I don't use it anymore because we have Adobe Pro and everything's electronic and things are so much easier. But now it's something that I have in my craft room, which I think is hilarious. I actually had gone to Office Depot to get some of the thinner redaction tape because I had a good idea of another card background that I wanted to create. And then I also realized that I have a ton of washi tape in my collection that I bought because I went on this crazy collecting spree of washi tape, but I don't use it for anything. So now all my washi tape that I use is for my crafting, like holding down projects, masking off certain areas, and the only special feature of this masking tape is that it's an inch, which is larger than most washi rolls. So that's the only reason I'm using this particular masking tape, and you can use anything you have in your collection. I even considered using a piece of acetate because you could just wipe off the ink and then move on to the next, but I kind of like the stickiness of the masking tape and it kind of sticks to the paper and you don't have to worry about it peeling up. So for this second background, there was no rhyme or reason. I just went in with as many colors as I could and I added the colors. So there's nothing special about this. You probably can't recreate this. I probably can't recreate it to be exactly the same either. And I just kind of wanted to go in with random colors. My last background, which is this one, is actually more specific where I just create triangles of colors. So anytime there is a corner, like I'll put the tape at the corner and then I'll create another triangle. So as you can see, these backgrounds are really quick and easy to put together. It doesn't really require any thinking whatsoever. I decided to think about how I was going to color the raccoon later on, and I picked some basic colors that were in the card. I didn't really think too much into it, and I kind of just wanted to have fun, inked things up and created backgrounds really quickly. A raccoon is going to be black and white and very monochromatic anyway, so I didn't think that it would clash, and the only thing that could clash with these really bright backgrounds is the balloon. But I did want to pull in some of that color for the balloons when I colored it up, and I didn't really have to worry about it. So if you are kind of in a slump, I think that this is one of the easiest ways to create a ton of backgrounds really quickly without really thinking about it, without really being precise about it, and without having to use any other additional items that you need to buy or get. And the masking tape is relatively cheap. I think I got it on Amazon for like $3, and it's a pretty big roll, so it's gonna last me for a while, even though I used a good chunk of this for each of the different colors. So these Ink on 3 Atelier inks are also water reactive. So for one of my panels, I just splattered water all over, and I did take a paper towel and kind of pick up that color. I decided that I wanted a little bit more interest, so I pulled out the Shark Tooth White re-inker and used it for white splatter. So this panel has both water splatter and white ink splatter. And then I think for my next one, I decided to do gold splatter. So I pulled out my metallic watercolors and I just added water to the gold that I wanted and splattered it everywhere. This box isn't anything special. I got this in a package and I've just kept it because it was the perfect size to do splatter without getting it everywhere on my desk. And my very first panel, I didn't do any splatter to it, so I just left it as is. So I stamped out that raccoon that I was talking about, who has his back facing us holding the balloons, and I will color him up really quickly for you guys to see. And I didn't do anything special. I used, I think, 4 Copic colors. So I'm going in with my darkest color and adding all the shadows with that C9, and I usually will pick wherever there are little curves on his body, and that basically is near his head, the neck, and then right behind the tail, because any area near his tail would be a little bit dark. And then I'll go in with the next color, which was the C7, and just adding up that, building up that color around that C9. Then I'll go in with the C5 and start really moving in and filling up that raccoon, and then I will go in with my C3 and color up the rest of the raccoon. So with Copic markers, sometimes the colors actually pick up the colors that you already had put down. So when I put that C3 down, it kind of picked up some of that C5, and I really wanted the raccoon to look a little bit darker. So I went back in with my C5, just added a little bit more color, and then went back in with my C3 to blend everything out. For the tail itself, I wanted to keep all the darker areas towards the bottom of the tail because of the fact that I have C9 near at the top of his tail where the shadows would be. So by keeping the darker colors at the bottom of his tail, it doesn't really blend into the shadows on his body. And that way you can distinguish the tail from his body. And that's usually the most difficult part of a dark critter, is that you kind of lose the details because he's super dark gray. And by doing that, I'm able to kind of have his tail pop out and you really see it. So for the balloon itself, I am going in with 4 different colors. What I do is I go in with my darkest just around the edges, and then I'll start flicking out the same colors. So I color the same way that I do with the raccoon, and the only difference for the balloon is that I'll leave that little line of white highlight for the balloon on the right hand side, and then I'll blend everything out. So there's nothing too special about that, but if you guys really want something more in-depth, I can go in-depth. I realize that people kind of are watching my videos for coloring, and if that's something that interests you, just let me know. So for putting the cards together, I went in really simple. We created very fun backgrounds, and I think that with a busy background, you need to keep everything else very simple. So for this first card, I just stamped the sentiment at the very bottom, and I added the raccoon with liquid glue and just added a little bit of color to ground him. I did the same thing for the second card. I picked out another sentiment and kind of put it in the bottom left-hand corner and added the raccoon. And then I went in with another gray marker just to ground him. I have realized that with a lot of my images, I like to ground them because otherwise it looks like they're kind of floating and it doesn't really make sense. I know that cards don't necessarily have to make sense, but in this case, I liked just to ground my animals. For my third card, I pulled out the Hero Art Infinity Rectangles because I decided that this one was more busy than the rest of the other backgrounds. So I cut out a rectangle and I trimmed down this card panel by 1/4 of an inch on the top and side, and I'll be matting it on black cardstock. Because I use the coordinating dies for the raccoon hugs, it leaves this nice white border around the animal and it really pops. So I just will have him sit in the middle of that rectangle and I will go ahead and stamp a sentiment for that card. I actually ended up using that rectangle that I cut out for a fourth card, but I just didn't film it because I made that decision afterwards. And just to add a little bit of embellishments, I pulled out some of these soapy bubbles from Trini Stamps and I'm placing them in random areas just to fill it up. I thought it would just be a nice touch to the cards, and you could have left them completely blank, but I decided that I have a ton of embellishments and I'm going to use them. So I like very neutral ones. Soapy bubbles is just clear iridescent ones that I really like. So yeah, that's it for all 3 cards. I hope you enjoyed it and this gives you some ideas for some quick and easy backgrounds for some cards. I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye!